Okay, we're in DCS. We are in the Tomcat. We're parked on the ground at Nellis. We're cold and dark, so we're just going to run through the startup procedures for the F-14B Tomcat. And if we have a quick look around the Tomcat, we can see the difference between the DCS Tomcat and the DC Designs Tomcat in Flight Simulator. So this costs about 3 times as much as the one in Flight Simulator, but it's an entirely different animal, as you're about to see. Okay, so let's go and get back in. We're going to use the keyboard to scroll around while we're inside the cockpit, and we'll try to ignore, there's a few flights flying around Nellis this morning, so we'll try to ignore them. So first things first, let's go and look down here. There's a little switch here that switches on the oxygen system. Then we need to go and talk to the ground crew to switch on the air and power to the aircraft. You can see there's a Tomcat flying around out there. So there's a keyboard combination for that. Unfortunately, I'm running in 4K, so you're not going to see the options very easily up here. So we're going to press F8 to go to the ground crew, F5 to get the ground air, and F1 to connect it.
Ground air supply.
Same again for the power.
Copy.
So we're going to go hash F8 for the ground crew, F2 for the power, F1 to connect it.
Copy. Ground power is now on.
Okay, next we need to talk to the RIO, or the radar intercept officer. So we press A. So this is the guy in the back. We need to tell him to start his procedures with the aircraft. So we press Control and 3.
Okay.
So he's going to get on with what he's doing behind us. We can sit in the back of the Tomcat and do it all ourselves, but we also have this AI RIO in the back, and we can ask him to do everything. So then he's asking for a comm check, so we'll say Control 4. Okay, next thing we do is arm our ejection seat. So we spin around in our seat, and there's a little switch up here, and that arms the ejection seat. So we can skip back to looking forwards.
Closing canopy. Check.
So, okay, so we can see that happen.
Alright, ready to start.
Okay, so in the Tomcat in DCS, the mirrors do work, but you can turn them off to help with rendering. So if I turn them on, obviously I'm going to see my own head. Yeah? So we're going to turn them back off though, because it makes the simulator a lot smoother. Because if you think about it, it's actually drawing 3 more screens if you do that. Because they are, you know, they're accurate representations of what's behind you. Okay, so we're going to start the engines. So we crank the right engine. So the engine crank switch is down here. So we got the wrong way. So we crank the right engine, and you will see the bars start to appear. So there it goes. So if I just zoom in on that so you get to see it. There we go. That's a good view to see this from. So we wait for this to come up to about the 3rd line, which is 20%. So this is very similar to the big commercial jets, where, you know, the ground air is spinning up the engine, and then when it gets to a stable position, you click on the throttle to move it to idle, which is the same as introducing fuel, for example, and then this will climb up and it will level out at about 70%. So you can see the temperature is climbing. So there we go. So we just wait for things to calm down. If we go and look outside, you can see heat pouring out of the engine now. And you can see the startup sequence with the engine exhaust flexing around as it goes through its initialization sequence. So everything is simulated in this thing. Okay, notice as well where the pilot is looking. He's looking where we were looking. Yeah? So if we zoom in a bit further, he's looking down exactly where we're looking down here. So it reflects even where the pilots are looking to where you're looking in the cockpit. So if you're in a multiplayer environment, obviously that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's engine number so engine number 2 started, and then we go for engine number 1. So we're waiting for, here we go, it's coming up. So the RPM is increasing. This is the compressed air from the ground air supply, which is spinning up the engine. So when it gets to about the third line, which is 20%, we then push on. Okay, and then, actually I'm not sure it does represent percentages when you get the first few lines, but we'll push on anyway. Okay, so we've moved the throttle towards idle, which introduces the fuel. So then we can have a look outside. We can see that happening. And you'll see those vanes at the exits of the engine flexing around as the engine initializes. Okay, so now we have engines. We can switch on the stability augmentation system. I can't talk today. So we go pitch on, roll on, yaw on. We power up the screens in the aircraft. So the power switches for those are over here. So we want the VDI, the HUD, and the HSD. If we move the HSD mode to TID or TID, we get to see progress. There we go. And this little marker will move across, and it actually takes about 7 minutes. So I may well pause the video if we're sat here for ages waiting for them. Okay, we uncage the backup attitude indicator over here just by clicking on or pushing in the knob. And then we can set the radar altitude lower limit by rolling the wheel on it. So this is the point at which, when we're below 200 feet, for example, if we set it to 200, then it will start saying, you know, pull up, pull up. Okay, we can initialize the wing sweep. This is a little bit more involved. So we lift the cover on the wing sweep is already lifted. We move it to 68 degrees. We can see down here, there's 68 degrees. So we move it to 68 and we wait 10 seconds. So 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Then we move it all the way forwards and then right click on it to push it in. We then replace the cover. Then we click the master reset button for the wing sweep. And then we switch on the wing sweep auto mode, which you have to have a binding for, and I've just done that. Okay, next thing we do, so if we go and look outside, while that was happening the wings would have been moving around, and you can see they are now fully forwards. So let's go and look down at the lighting panel. So this is again is in common with lots of other aircraft. We'll put the anti-collision lights on, we'll turn on the position lights for the tail and the wing, and we're good to go with that. Okay, so that's the lights done. I'm referring to a paper list, by the way. I'll put it in the notes. I've cribbed from the Grim Reaper's startup sequence. So again, they have said themselves this is entirely functional. We're missing out all the checks and balances which do work in this aircraft, where you can test lights, you can test, you know, all the different systems. Okay, we need to power up the UHF radio, so that's on the left panel to the rear. So that's here, we switch it to both, if we can remember how. There we go. We now need to power up the TACAN. We turn the knob on the TACAN to TR, which is there. So you can see the labels for these here. So UHF is obviously the radio. TACAN is the TACAN system, which is the navigation system. We remove the ground and air power. So again, if we press F5 on the keypad to center the view up, and then zoom out, and then press hash. And then we want to go to the ground crew. We want to remove ground air, and we want to disconnect it.
G, disconnect ground air supply.
He didn't say it was disconnected, did he? ask him to do that again. Oh, I asked in the wrong order. I asked for ground air supply, ground power, sorry, F5.
Chief, connect ground air supply.
Oh no, I've done it wrong. First mistake of the day. Disconnect.
Chief, disconnect ground air supply.
Okay, so he's not telling me he's doing that. That's fine. We can hear it get cut off anyway. And then ground crew, F8. And then ground power, which is F2. And disconnect the ground power. So that's done. So we're now disconnected from the ground. So we are at this point just waiting for the inertial guidance to align, and when this marker gets to the far side it is aligned. So we're going to wait with that. So I'm going to pause recording. Okay, we're recording again, and you can see the inertial navigation system has now lit up. So we are good to go. We now have longitude and latitude cycling through on the display over here. Okay, so let's take this plane for a flight, shall we? So we'll just do a very quick circuit just to confirm everything's working okay. So there we go. We released the parking brake.
Ready to taxi.
And I have mapped a button, I believe. Oh no, so it's N for the nose wheel steering. So we'll go and enable nose wheel steering, and we get that lights up over here. So let's just zoom out slightly so we can actually see what we're doing. We ease the engines forwards. We'll do this from outside actually. And we're rolling. Yeah, as I said, it's a completely different animal to Flight Simulator, isn't it? So you can see there are two Northrop F-5Es that have just come in. So we're going to avoid them as we taxi down. We can hit everything, and everything will damage appropriately, so we can rip the end of one wing off, which obviously is not advisable. So let's get out onto the taxi line now. Now we've gone past those tigers. Should we turn the mirrors on just while we're taxiing? Turn them back off. So there's some more tigers over here, parked up. Get a lot of stuff at Nellis. There's usually a lot of stuff going on. So I believe we need to go around this way actually. So we're going to cut across the lines, not follow them. So we are not going to be using weapons today. We're just going to have a flight. Oh, there's somebody else down here. Who's that lining up? It's another Tomcat by the look of it. On the other runway. Just in the distance down there. Let's go have a nose at him while we're going past. Yeah, there's a Tomcat. Oh, they've got the canopy up. They're parked, obviously, and an F5. So again, we're not using ATC. We could use ATC. It does have it built in, so you can request takeoff clearance and all that kind of thing. So there's Las Vegas in the distance in front of us. So let's get this show on the road. Full reheat. So we're not using flaps for this takeoff, so the aircraft should move around quite a lot. You'll notice you don't get airspeed on the HUD in a Tomcat. It's old. You do get a manual gauge though. We're coming through 150 knots. And I'm not holding the centre line at all well. And gear up. So we're going full reheat along the runway. And the first shock you're going to get about the Tomcat is how much it shakes. So we're going to pull up hard. It's an old aircraft. It doesn't have fly-by-wire, anything like some of the more modern aircraft. And it tends to fall around all over the place. It's big and heavy. It's like a big agile school bus, basically. Okay, turn the reheat off. And let's have a look outside. So remember we put the wings on auto. So if we go into afterburner, you'll see the wings change shape and go to the classic shape. So they're starting to move. And there they go. So obviously if we pull some G's, you'll see the contrails forming off the wingtips, or so the vortices I should say. You will also notice the wings shaking and flexing. So although the F-14 is very agile, you can see the slats have extended automatically. Although it is very agile, it's also not the most stable aeroplane in the world. So it is very much 1960s technology. So if we, for example, we can completely depart flight very quickly, look. So I've just almost spun it instantly. So I'm just fighting to get it back. So we'll press F1. And we're back in controlled flight. So we lost control instantly there just by throwing it around too much. So it just shows if you don't know what you're doing with the Tomcat, you can crash it very easily. Those great big surfaces outside. Those great big surfaces mean you can throw it around. But you have to do so with respect. Okay. So where's Nellis? Let's go back in and land. You can hear the airframe rattling around as we exert force on it. So there's Las Vegas over there, which tells us where Nellis is. And there it is, right behind us. This aircraft really doesn't like being thrown around too much. It buffets and it whinges and it complains and it will depart controlled flight very easily, which is obviously what you see in Top Gun. And yes, you can flat spin it very easily, and it is a devil to get out of a flat spin. You generally lose about 10-15,000 feet getting out of a flat spin if you know what you're doing and if you are lucky. So you can see we're doing about 350 knots, Mach 0.57ish down here. So yeah, it's very much analog gauges rule the skies with the Tomcat. So we'll scrub some speed off and then we'll just go and do a straight in approach. We're not going to fly a circuit. Although I guess from here we are a bit high, we could go for the circuit, couldn't we? So let's keep an eye on the compass down here. There's this NASCAR track provides a very good reference point actually for the turn-in for the runway. So we just overshot slightly for the lineup for this runway. So just coming down through 4,000 feet. That's obviously above sea level. So speed is bleeding off slowly. Let's have a look from outside. Not holding direction very well, are we? As you can see, Nellis is absolutely enormous. So the Nellis Air Force Base stretches on and on. We'll just dip a wing to have a look down the flight line now. There's fighters parked everywhere. Okay. Down to about 200 knots. We'll begin our turn to fly the reciprocal of the runway direction. Down to about 170 knots. We need to be careful. So we're just going to go, and we can't actually get to the flap lever from where we are, which is a bit of a shame. Let's see if I just dump the throttles for a moment. Yeah, we can now. Let's go full flaps. Center the view up. So again, we get lots of references around Nellis. There's this hill here. If we fly down the right side of it, we're basically in the right place. And then we can make the turn in. Oh sorry, fly down the left side of the hill, the right side of the plane, I should say. So 200 knots. You can see it's starting to shake. That's because we have full flaps and we're obviously going quite fast. Doesn't like going much faster than about 190 knots with the flaps, 180 knots. Okay, so let's get the gear down. You see that happen. Okay, so we're pretty much set for landing. So we're going to speed up a little bit, pull the nose up. The aircraft's getting quite heavy on the controls as we slow down. So let's have a look out and see where we are in relation to the runway. Okay, there's the NASCAR track. So we're just watching the runway. This is a lot easier in VR, by the way, and the VR experience in X-Plane is the not X-Plane, in DCS is the best VR experience I have seen in any simulator. The rendering is absolutely astounding. It's so sharp. So you don't get a velocity vector in a Tomcat. So it is very much more on judgment, which is why having the ball and things on the carrier is so useful. You haven't got reverse thrust, obviously, so it's about you managing energy really on the approach and visually keeping an eye on things. You have to remember this aircraft is late 60s technology really, early 70s when it was going through flight testing. And we're down. So wheel brakes. And we gently steer using the rudder. We haven't got nose wheel steering, remember, yet, but there's no point switching on until we've slowed down a bit. So we're using rudders at the moment. Okay, nose wheel steering is on. Now we can steer the nose. Again, it's complaining about because I've got maximum braking on. So there we go, we've slowed down. It's quite a long run, wasn't it, on the landing? It's a big heavy plane, remember. It's always quite nice at Nellis to have a nose around, so if we look out along the flight line you can see there's some F-15s over there. So there we go. Pretty much covered everything I wanted to. We will come back another day with DCS to look at weapons and dogfighting and some of the other stuff. So today was just about looking at the basic systems and taking the plane for a fly around Nellis. Yeah, so this is the Tomcat and everything works. The interesting thing to me is all the avionics suite works kind of internally and externally. So everything you see, like the head-up display, you will have noticed is quite laggy and jumpy, but that's real. That, you know, it's simulating the refresh rate of the real head-up display. Nothing to do with frame rate of the sim. So you can see I'm running at 60 odd frames a second. So we'll go and park up just before I stop recording, just so you get to see some of those planes that were on the flight line. Some F-16s directly in front of us. Just trying to do the throttles and arrange the views. There we go. So let's go and move the flaps back up while we're here. F-15s galore a bit further on. There's F-15Cs directly in front of us. So we're going to go right past them in a moment. There's some Vipers, F-16s here. So there's some F-15Cs. There's some F-15Es behind them, the Strike Eagles. And in the distance there's some Tomcats, so we'll go and park with the Tomcats. There's some F-18s parked behind the Tomcats. So here's the F-15Es we're just passing. Look at the level of detail and everything, it's ridiculous, isn't it? I think we were down at the far end, weren't we, of the Navy aircraft, so we're just going to jump across the lines here, otherwise we'll be here all day. We'll go and park at the end, shall we? Which is pretty much where we started. Not managing this very well, am I? Okay, so I think that's probably a good place to stop. So we can go and put the parking brake back on. Obviously we could go and shut the engines down and shut the aircraft back down now. We're not going to bother with all of that because you just wanted to see the plane fly, really, didn't you? So there you go, that was the F-14B in DCS. And so it's probably a very good comparison there against the one in Microsoft Flight Simulator. But obviously there's a whole other world in this game of actually, performing air combat operations. And with the aircraft that can do it with ground combat as well. So there you go. I'm going to leave it there. And we'll see you all soon.